You ready, GED students? Here we go. Problem says, what is the value of the expression below when x equals -1 and y equals -3? And then we see this kind of ugly little expression, x squared minus xy minus y squared. Now, before you panic, notice what good news we have. And that is this expression might look ugly because of all the letters, but the letters we see are all X's and Y's, and we know what those two letters mean. Right up here, we see X is equal to -1. X isn't a mystery, it's a known value. And Y is equal to -3. Y is not a mystery. Y is a known value as well. And that's great news because whenever we know the value of a variable, we can trade it out. So every time we see an X, we can trade it for the value -1 and so on. Now, there's two ways to do that trade. That trade is called substitution. We can do it on paper, or we can do it with the calculator. Now, this is one of those skills that I do want you to know how to do on paper if there's any chance you're going to college, because substitution is one of the most important skills for algebra, the type of math that you're most likely to have to do in college. So I'm going to do it first with the substitution by hand, and then I'll still do the calculations in the calculator. But then I'll show you afterwards how to do the entire thing in the calculator if you want. So let's start the way that I want you to do so that you're prepared. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I see in my expression is X. I'm going to trade out that X for a -1. But I need to remind you, remember that whenever you are putting a number into an exponential expression, what do I mean by exponential expression? You see that little 2 right there, that little power, that's an exponent. That's what makes that an exponential expression. So whenever you're doing that, you need to use parentheses. This is the most common error students make. Put a parentheses around that -1, and then the square should go on the outside. And now let's keep copying that expression. Next thing I see is a minus, and so I have a minus. And next thing I see is an X. And so we're going to, every time we see X, we're going to trade it out for -1. So there's a -1. And again, this time I'm using parentheses just so you can tell the difference between that first minus and then the negative sign and -1. And now X and Y are shoved together here. That means they're multiplying. So I'll open up another set of parentheses to say multiplying and stick in that value for Y, -3. Next thing I see in my expression is this minus sign, and so I'll still have the minus sign. And then I have Y squared. Well, remember, if you have a negative that you want to square, it's so important that you put the negative in parentheses. And now that you have this expression, you can type the entire thing into your calculator if you want. Make sure you use the parentheses in your calculator too, guys, or you'll get it wrong. So open up the parentheses and use the negative down at the bottom for -1, close parentheses, and then I'll use the X squared button. And from that, I'm going to minus. And your calculator is a little dumb. It doesn't know that minus and negative are kind of interchangeable. And so it's important that you use the minus when I'm talking about subtraction there, and that you use the negative sign when you're just saying a number is negative. So open up my parentheses, and then I'll do -1, close parentheses, open up the next one. I'm just typing exactly what I wrote, times -3 minus, open up parentheses, -3, close parentheses, and square. And I get -11. Now, here's the deal. That's true. That's legit. I need you to have that skill. And it's absolutely wonderful that you have it for college. But the problem is with all these negatives and all these minuses, it's so easy to drop one, lose one, mix one up when you're typing into the calculator. So I'm also going to show you the kind of cheat way to do the substitution in the calculator. So let's try this another way. Okay, in order to do substitution in your GED calculator, trading the X for -1 and trading the Y for -3, in order to do that, you have to save those values for the variable in your calculator. We call that storing. And so what you'll do is you'll type the number in first. So I'm going to start with this. X is equal to -1, and I'll tell my calculator that by typing -1 and then storing it. See right there on the bottom left, STO with an arrow, that means store. And right above that button, there's your variable button. You hit it once and it gives you an X. So right there, you're saying that I want you to store the value of -1 for X. So every time I type X from here on out, I mean -1. Press enter so that your calculator knows you want to save that number. And now let's do the same thing with the Y value. -3, we would like to store. Remember to do your number first as Y. Now you might say, where's the Y button? Well, you just use the same button and you hit it twice and you get Y. And enter, and now I've stored both -1 and -3 values in there. I've stored an X and I've stored a Y. And now if you do it that way, you don't even have to do the substitution yourself. The calculator will do it. You can just type in the expression exactly the way you see it. Your calculator already knows. You already told it that every time I type X, trade it out for -1, and every time I type Y, trade it out for -3. And so I'm going to be able to type the X squared minus X. Now here's where this gets a little tricky. If you just hit the button again to try to get a Y, it's going to change that first letter. So that's a little frustrating. So I'm going to keep hitting it till I have an X again. Use the right arrow key up at the top right here, and that'll get you out of that first variable, so then you can use it again to get the Y. So I have XY minus a couple of times for a Y squared, and I've typed in exactly what I see, and you can see, hey, that's the fast way to get -11. And honestly, if you learn that calculator skill of doing substitution in your calculator, there's so many GED style examples that you can use with just the formula sheet and a little bit of substitution and this gorgeous calculator. All right, you guys, super proud of you. Happy learning.